I believe I've thoroughly demonstrated by now that I'm a fan of classic-styled first-person shooters. From the old, like Duke 3D and Redneck Rampage, to more recent entries like Doom Eternal and Black Mesa. Today I'll be looking at a rather interesting game that came out recently in 2018. It has tech akin to the original Quake and an almost blood aesthetic. It's time to double your shotguns and grip those bar-shaped suds for all your life as I review DUSK for the PC.
Right off the bat, DUSK establishes itself as a pure classic-style, high-octane first-person shooter. There's no long-winded backstory or lengthy establishing cutscenes here. You pick a difficulty and a brief credits and title, and then you're dropped into the thick of it. A voice calls to kill the intruder, and you're suddenly fending off maniacs with chainsaws. All you have to start out with is some measly sickles to defend yourself with and a flashlight to help you see into the darkness. Thankfully, it's less like Doom 3's flashlight, more like Half-Life's flashlight, where it doesn't take the place of your actual weapons. As for your sickles, you can also technically use them to deflect projectiles with. You soon acquire a pistol to better defend yourself with, although it's obviously limited in ammo. Uniquely, though, the pistols aren't completely made obsolete by stronger weapons. In addition to the conservation benefit of having its own ammo for dealing with weaker foes, it can also be dual-wielded, although the accuracy suffers just a tiny bit. Still, that's enough to keep it relevant a bit longer than pistols in these kind of games tend to be. In the same fashion, you get a lever-action shotgun that can also be dual-wielded. Accuracy actually isn't reduced while dual-wielding shotguns, meaning there's no reason not to, although there's obviously a spread regardless. Like in Doom, you also get a super shotgun that delivers much greater damage for its ammo cost in exchange for having a much worse spread, making it ideally a closer-ranged weapon. Of course, you also get an assault rifle with its own ammo, and like Doom's chain gun, it can be sniped by firing one round at a time, or you can just spray it. There's also a hunting rifle that can be zoomed in for more effective sniping. It can also go through an enemy and hit one behind it if weakened enough due to its two-projectile nature. The crossbow, on the other hand, never fails to pierce enemies, which makes it great for packed line situations. Then you've got the mortar, essentially the grenade launcher from Quake, except you can also remote detonate them. The most powerful of the normal weapons is the Riveter, essentially a souped-up rocket launcher. Of course, I said normal weapons for a reason. There's a far more powerful weapon, one that can make even the bosses shake with fear. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the almighty, all-powerful, and all-around deadly bar of soap. You heard that right, it's a bar of soap, which you pick up and throw at your enemies. However, this isn't any mere bar of soap. It's been scientifically designed in France to have the most pleasing of scents while effectively killing 100% of bacteria, unlike the wimpy 99.9% you normally see. It really does make you smell like an angel. Oh yeah, and it also one-shots any enemy in the game. Oh, and did I mention that bosses aren't immune to it? There's usually one hit in each level to find. In addition, you can actually find a sword on some levels. Obviously, it's very short-ranged, but it makes up for it by being fairly powerful. If your morale, which is DUSK's way of saying armor, is above 50, you can reflect projectiles at the cost of 1 morale each. With at least 100 health, you can charge it up to triple its damage output. If you need more health, there's always your handy-dandy cigar. I assume it was put there to prevent the player from running into impossible situations due to classically having static health. It restores health, albeit slowly, so it could probably help you in a bind. In a way, it's sort of like the water drinking on Duke 3D, just in portable form, and you start out with it. Please note that unless you're the DUSK dude and a video game character, smoking is bad for your health. Obligatory health warning out of the way, let's move on. You can also utilize map hazards such as explosions to damage enemies with. Naturally, there's also the tried true infighting, which this game also has. It's a real pity that infighting isn't in more games, especially nowadays. In addition to weapons, the player has some limited power-ups to play with. Fast Fire Totem is the most common, as the name implies, briefly speeding up the fire rate of your weapons. There's also a power-up called Serum of Blistering Heat, stopping time until you act. Super obvious reference to super hot is super obvious. There's also a Crystal of Madness that functions like the Enraged Plasma in Bioshock, causing effective enemies to go berserk on each other. Perhaps the most interesting power-up is just called Climbing Thing. It allows you to scale walls and in a move similar to Boost Ball Spider Ball hopping in the Metroid Prime games, jump across walls. Of course, what good are weapons and items without some good-fashioned enemies to try them out on? Leatherneck is the chainsaw weirdos I mentioned earlier. Obviously inspired by Leatherface, they're armed with a simple chainsaw. They've also got a good amount of health and a strong melee attack though, so don't let them get too close. Mages look slightly similar in design to something, don't they? That's right, you're dealing with members of the clueless Klutzes clan, but in any case they fling projectiles and aren't too durable, so fire away. There are also a couple of melee-centric animals to deal with. Rats are fairly weak, but can be a nuisance in larger numbers. Supposedly there's a boss variant in some secret level somewhere. Black Phillips are demonic goats and are a bit more troublesome since they spit blood at you and can likewise be found in numbers. Wendigos are basically stealth monsters, completely invisible but given away by their bloody footprints and their breathing. Shoot them to break their invisibility and expose the ugly goat heads to a world of pain. Possessed scarecrows are more of a concern, packing a super shotgun, so keep your distance and unleash heavy firepower. They can also pose themselves as decorations, similar to the statue enemies from Nightmare 3D. Clearly this crafty devil does in fact have a brain. Fork maidens are like Doom's barons in that they're bullet sponges and fire damaging green projectiles. Possessed soldiers are just straight up Half-Life territory, seeking to mow you down with their assault rifles. Scientists are straight up glass cannons, dying fairly easily but wielding very dangerous needles, so be careful. Welders, as the name may suggest, wear welding masks and are armed with flamethrowers. Better not let these Mancubus wannabes get too close. As if the regular mage's design wasn't already inspiring enough, these wizards are of the grand variety, if you get what I'm saying. They have homing attacks and soak up far more damage than their regular mage counterparts, so don't take them too lightly. Simple turrets, the tool of the trade of engineers everywhere. Unfortunately, these ones are not your friends, so beware of their rapid-fire rifles. Cowgirls can best be described as Cyberdemon Light, or I suppose the Tyrant from Doom Eternal. So basically cybernetic and rapid-fire rockets from their gun arm. They also stop to shoot, so your best bet is to outmaneuver them. Priestesses are oddly named because they look more like knights if you ask me. They use a sword though, so keep your distance. Or if you have your own sword, one solid charge shot will put them out of your misery. Cart dogs are a rather odd enemy. A battering ram with a legless dog is the ram. Watch out for their charge attack and use heavy firepower so you can put these very unfortunate hounds to sleep. Bone monks are hooded skeletons that fly around shooting fireballs like demented bony cacodemons. Naturally, they're best taken out with range-centric weapons like the hunting rifle. Chomper's son is, well, the Chomper's son. They're fish-like creatures who spit blood on you like Black Phillips and only appear once in the game. Talk about an underwater pest. Horrors are truly freaky, stick figures with wide-open mouths. My suggestion?
Shoot them with fire!
Firepower, that is. They can spit green projectile spreads that make them dangerous up close. Rounding things off for normal enemies is the Bone Ball. These freaky spiked moon-looking things float around and spit skulls at you. Thankfully, they aren't separate enemies, just projectiles. They're still pretty dangerous though, so snipe them. And now that brings us to the bosses. The Intoxicator spits acid on you and is just generally unpleasant all around, so deal with accordingly. The Duke brothers are just the initial boss variant of the Wizards of Grand Variety, so beware of their homing shots. The Experiments are horses from hell, firing a volley of fireballs from their mouth. There are two of them sequentially to deal with, three if you find the secret. Mama is the bigger and badder cowgirl, hitting hard and having health to match. Likewise, Big John is like the commando of the possessed soldiers, wielding a big friggin' minigun. Son of Intoxicator is, as you may expect, the Intoxicator's son. He's stronger and more dangerous, guess his dad was past his prime or something. The Guardian may look silly, but is very dangerous with a beefy health bar and mortar grenades that make it slightly unpredictable. Little Neck is a smaller and faster Leatherneck, kinda funny, but don't let him get too close. Watchers of the Gate appear after a few enemy waves, so you might be worn down by that point. They've also got the highest level of health and attack with mortars, so have fun with that. One way you can deal with them is to jump off the edge of the arena. The player will simply be teleported back in, so it helps to dodge their attacks. Jacob is the leader of this clueless Klutz's clan, so you know he's just a delightful little fellow. He's also the most dangerous boss in the entire game because he likes to jump around a lot like an AI bot, and he's just generally a huge pain in the ass. You'll really need to pull out your A game to get this madman out of your misery. Of course, it's not quite over yet, as you must deal with a grand demonic creature who seems to be the epicenter behind all this madness. You'll have to shoot cracks in the ceiling to flood him with light and expose his weak point before blasting him. Compared to Jacob, he's a relatively breather boss. Just keep the pressure up until he's down for the count. In addition to all this, the game also features some interesting twists, such as using jumping pads to soar through the air or even reversing gravity to walk on ceilings. Something Prince of Bel-Air joke. Thankfully, fall damage is null and void here. Naturally, there's also secret hunting everywhere, and as mentioned, some sections where you can swim as well. Ultimately, Dusk is a pure balls-to-the-wall classic first-person shooter. It feels like an amalgamation of different classic first-person shooters, but I think they blend together really well. It really follows the Carmack principle of story not being all that important. It has a story, of course, and an interesting one, but it's just not a very invasive one. Speaking of which, the gameplay is golden, but that leads us into... This game's story may not be overly involved, but still, spoilers inbound. The game has a twist at the end that you might want to see for yourself, so if you don't want to get spoiled, just follow the timeline right now. 10, 9, 8, 1. The story takes place in a city called DUSK, Pennsylvania, where Lovecraftian ruins are discovered underneath the surface, which gets the attention of the feds. Research teams of the military are brought in, but they're subsequently possessed by a demonic force for the most part, and the town is condemned. Given that it takes place in Pennsylvania, it sounds like another story that's inspired by Centralia. A treasure hunter known simply as the Dusk Dude, which I'm guessing is a reference to Postal Dude, infiltrates the city hunting for treasure. He's subsequently captured and has to escape the farmlands. After getting through that, he still has to fight through the soldiers and scientists that were possessed by the demonic influence corrupting the city. Finally, he must travel through some other dimensional plane of existence. Going through various locations such as a cathedral and underground city, he reaches his own home. However, things aren't as they appear. His home is a corrupted memory that he has to fight his way through. He's sent through hellish trials in order to prove his worthiness. After finally confronting Jacob, the leader, the Dusk Dude proves to be too much for him. Jacob's own disciples then betray and kill him, deeming him unworthy. The Dusk Dude must finally confront He's the Lovecraftian deity responsible for all this madness. However, he cannot actually be killed. When the dude inflicts enough damage on him, deems him worthy of his great power. Thus, seemingly, the Dusk Dude becomes the new leader of the occult and the cycle begins anew. Not gonna lie, that was quite an interesting twist. The protagonist isn't some altruistic hero. He went there just looking to satisfy his greed. In the end, he succumbed to the same madness as the rest of them, merely becoming the king of the brainwashed in the name of It's definitely very Lovecraftian in that there really isn't a happy ending here. It leads you to believe you might actually kill the big demon and save the day, but nope, no such luck here. Foolish mortal, you don't simply beat Cthulhu, you just hope he doesn't acknowledge your existence. I'm typically not a fan of bad endings because they just feel incomplete and like a cliffhanger, but in this case it makes sense to take it that route and it's performed quite well. Now let's not go beating around the bush here. As a low-tech first-person shooter that looks deliberately Quake-inspired, it's low-tech to say the least. That being said, it does what it does quite well. It doesn't just wear it on its sleeve as a gimmick, which I can say about some other games. It can be an aesthetically beautiful game at times. It has some pretty creative and varied levels, from smaller corridor-based levels to one absolutely giant level where you're running around on pipes high up in the air. Some levels later on even seem to break the laws of reality, especially when there's a rural home area and the environment rips apart. And as if that wasn't crazy enough, they're layered so that jumping off one layer will send you right into another one. The game in general also has a good lighting system with baked shadows throughout. The game's music is a mix of tense and horror to heart-pounding and metal. It's almost like they took the best aspects of PC Doom and PS1 Doom's music soundtrack. Boss music especially tends to be very adrenaline-filling and aggressive. Occasionally, the occult leader will taunt you from time to time with his demonically deep voice. If you thought that was intimidating, just listen to the main demon's voice.
He was worthy, you know, and he accomplished so much. But then, you came along. You who were stronger. You who were faster. You I like better.
Those of you with a good ear might recognize him as the voice of Caleb from Blood. Now that's a nice callback reference. Really though, Dusk is just full of references. The Lovecraftian and Blood stuff are obvious, but then there are things like Black Phillip being the name of a goat from the movie The Witch. The references to things like Doom and Superhot are also on point. Ultimately, Dusk excels at nailing that classic FPS aesthetic. It really does look like it could have been released in the 90s, and this is aided further by the funny references and creative designs.
It's like a blast from the past and for all the right reasons.
Dusk isn't some astronomically amazing game changer here. It's simply a small-scaled indie game that seeks to recapture the magic of a past era. In that sense, it succeeds in a big way. It has just the right blend of tense horror with cheeky and over-the-top humor and references. Where else will you find a game filled with eldritch abominations that you can slay by throwing soap on them? It's a unique experience that understands what made classic FPS games so much fun to play, and you'll have a blast with it if you set your expectations accordingly. That has been my review of Dusk. Thank you so much for tuning in with me.
Now go and grab your dual pistols and start shooting up some cloaked cultists.